How hard could it be? So on today's installment, we're going to take the rough glue up in the template that I made yesterday. I traced it out and took it to the bandsaw for the heavy removal. Afterwards, I make sure the template still fits. I didn't screw up anywhere. And then we take it to the planer and go through and just get it to the rough thickness that I need the whole thing to be. It goes through again later on to get the body down to thickness after the neck is done, but the headstock has to keep the same depth. So here it is afterwards, and it turns out that the side that looked the best was what I thought was going to be the back. So I had to change the template a little bit. It still worked, and I was able to get it to fit and still look good and have some nice proportions. So then I cover the whole thing in blue tape and use hot glue to stick the template to it for running it through the router. I'm always surprised at how well this sticks, but it's honestly fantastic. I'm using a spiral upcut double bearing solid carbide router bit. It's 1/2 inch by 2 inch cutting depth to cut this to size the template. Here I'm doing it, and I was off a little bit in the height of it. I really should have made the template thicker than 1/4 inch, and that's something that I'm going to remember for next time. But this went fairly well, and that router bit really does a killer job at removing material. I would really like to try a compression bit, but for now this one does the job fairly well. Removing the template's easy. You just pry it off and then peel the tape away, and you don't have any glue residue stuck to your piece in case any of the surfaces need to be finished or if they're pre-finished for whatever you're using this kind of template and router for. So the next step was to set the angle of the neck. The neck is angled back from the guitar slightly so that when you pull on the truss rod pulls the neck of the guitar away from the front to counteract the tension of the springs. I just did some rough measurements to figure out what the difference in height was, and then I set that height on my neck. It was about 6 mil. I don't know what the angle or degree would be, and I really don't think it's that important because I'm also going to bow my truss rod or use a double action truss rod depending on what I can find in the short time that I have to do it. Next, I took it to the bandsaw and I cut the angle for the neck to body, and this was relatively stressful because you can't really put the guitar flat on it. You can see at the end I actually have to pick the guitar up and have it floating. So I left about 1/8 of an inch proud and then used a hand plane to get it flat and true and down to the line where I needed it so that I could have an easier time gluing the neck on. And once I did that as well, I used a block and some sandpaper to smooth it out and get it so it's ready for glue up. Next step was I marked where the neck needed to be cut and the angle for the neck. And again, the neck has to be angled back even further from the headstock has to be angled back even further from the neck. And you can see there the cutaway in the back of it. And then I trued that up with a plane and a block as well. Then I set the thickness for the neck with a, marking gauge. I set the thickness for the neck with a marking gauge, and then I also ran this through the jigsaw as well, and I marked that with a marking knife over the gauge just to give the knife a heavier line. And this one as well, I didn't leave as much as I wanted to on this in the bandsaw because this was fairly hard to cut because you can't rest anything on the bandsaw surface properly, and I really should have made some sort of sled or jig to hold the guitar while going through the bandsaw to do this. And maybe in the future I'll do that, but I don't know how many more guitars I'm going to build with a through neck on them. And so I did this. I mean, you can see you actually have to kind of hold the neck up while you're doing it, and I pulled it back to check to make sure I was on the line on the bottom. When you get in the middle, you can set the neck down, but then I had to pull it back to get the cutout for the guitar up above it. And I wasn't even able to go as far as I wanted to. I got to there, and then I had to pull it out and put it in the miter, so I had to cut that off. And the rest of it had to be cleaned up by hand with the RAS sander. So I removed that piece that I just cut off in the bandsaw, and then I got to the task of shaping the neck so it fits your hand. And honestly, I had no idea how much I was going to have to remove from it or how long it would take me to do this. But I used the Festool RAF 115 to do this, and the sander performed incredibly well. As you can see, this is 40 grit on a rotary disc sander. It removes material incredibly fast, and you can move up through the grits to 120, 150, and you can actually get a pretty smooth finish from everything with this. And you're able to shape things very well. It's a fantastic system. I know a lot of people do this with a spoke shave, but I don't have one of those yet. And I had seen another video of somebody doing it with the RAS, so I figured I'd do it with that. And I'm pretty happy that I did. It worked out well, and I think it was faster than doing it with the spoke shave. I had to narrow down the neck a bit as well to get it to the right thickness, as the neck actually gets wider towards the body and narrower toward the top. Next, I used the LS 130 sander from Festool as well to smooth out the edge of the body. I really should have spent a little bit more time on my template and tried to be a little smoother while routing it. I wasn't thinking, I was kind of rushing through that part because I was a little bit nervous, as this is my first guitar. So there was a fair amount of cleaning up to do while sanding, but this sander came in incredibly handy and saved me a lot of time. If I had to do this with like a round block and a flat block, I would have been here for hours instead of the 1 hour I spent smoothing out the sides of the body. Next, I took it to the router table and put a 1/4 inch round over on the entire body, just top and bottom, everything right up until the points for the cutouts on the body. I didn't go around those, I just went to them. After that, I marked out the material that was going to be removed by hand, and I got to work on that using some gouges and the LS 130 sander as well. Most of this was removed by hand, and then it was just cleaned up and smoothed out with the linear sander, which does a fantastic job on smoothing things out and rounding over corners without, digging too far into them or screwing up the shape that you've roughed out. It's fantastic for this, and it's also nice, like this project, I'm using a lot of tools that I haven't gotten a chance to use a ton in my day-to-day work, and there you can see it's great for getting into some awkward contours and smoothing them out. And then just because I had it out, I used it to smooth out the whole body up to 120 grit as the pre-sand for the finish. I just want to get everything generally shaped